All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sharon Dooley, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's session. I think you're going to find it interesting. It's a bit of a departure from our normal disaster recovery, etc. It's getting into more of the client side, but Richie's promised to present it from the point of view of what a DBA needs to see uh, needs to know about entity framework to deal with all those crazy applications your developers build. I'd like to thank Dell Software for its sponsorship of our virtual chapter. Um, their sponsorship makes it possible for us to raffle off the Amazon gift cards for every meeting. We're almost out of money. I'm hoping they come up with a new one before we run out of money completely. We are one of many virtual chapters, some of which specialize in different areas of SQL Server, others of which have a global focus. And new this month is the Global Persian virtual chapter. So if your native language is Persian, you may find that interesting. If you don't know about SQL Saturday, you should. They are all over the place. You can see a list of the upcoming in the near future ones on this slide. They're free one-day training events, conference quality presentations, and you can go to www.sqlsaturday.com to register for an event that's in your city or near you. In May, the Business Analytics Conference is coming up. It's going to be in San Jose. Lots and lots of stuff about big data, predictive analytics, etc. There is a discount code. If you register, you'll use the BAVCDB for $100 savings on the conference fee. We are a virtual chapter, meaning we don't have any physical presence, but there are also a whole lot of local chapters that will give you an opportunity for face-to-face networking, in-person training, opportunities to speak, quite often something for dinner. Usually in our chapter in Philadelphia, it's always pizza and soda, no beer. So if you can check on SQLpass.org to find out if there's a chapter near you. If there isn't one, consider starting one, and you'll get lots of help. Just contact CE at SQLpass.org. PASS is an all-volunteer organization. Yes, there's paid staff in the headquarters and so forth, but the organization depends on volunteers to keep it going. And stay in touch. If you're not a member of PASS, join now. It's free. And keep up with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, PASS, whatever your drug of choice is. And now I'm going to turn the meeting over to Richie Rump. Uh, he's a software developer, data architect, and project manager. He is a data developer with Brent Ozar Unlimited. Now, don't ask me what a data developer is. He made up that title. I asked him about it. He writes code to solve data problems. He's developed tools that are helpful in the tuning, and he's also the co-host of the Away for from the Keyboard podcast. And he founded .NET Miami, a community focused on enterprise development with .NET. He holds the project management, professional PMP, and certified Scrum Master certifications, as well as certifications in various Microsoft development technologies. And his Twitter handle is on the slide. And PowerPoint is screwing around with me. And what I want to do is turn the meeting over to Richie and let him do his thing.
All right. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to show my screen, and hopefully everybody can see this. Is that good? Good. Are we all right, Sharon?
Yep.
All right. So thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm usually speaking in front of a crowd, and I've got a crowd of faceless individuals, which is amazing. So for those who don't know why you're here, we're going to talk about any framework. I'm going to get into a little bit more about how we're going to be doing that. And yes, there will be a little bit of code. Yes, I will walk you through that, but it will be all familiar code. There's nothing that's going to be there that's going to be like, what's going on? So we're going to walk you through that. I am Richie Rump. I am a data developer, as she said. What is a data developer? That is a name that I made up. That is a title that I made up. And I do a lot of programming, a lot of data stuff. So that is kind of what I do. I play the middle. So who am I? So that was a good introduction there. So I'm not going to focus on any of this other stuff that's kind of hovering around here. But I do want to talk about Away from the Keyboard. Away from the Keyboard is a project that Cecil Phillip and I started about a year ago. And we've got about 35 episodes. We've got another episode that will go live tomorrow sometime. And we interview technologists, but we don't necessarily talk about technology. We've interviewed quite a few of the SQL Server community folks, Kendall Van Dyke and Gareth Swanepoel, some guy named Brent Ozar, who I now call Boss, and as well as Buck Woody. So if you're interested in hearing kind of the stories behind some of these SQL Server, former DBAs type people, come to awayfromthekeyboard.com, and we've got all these interviews ready for you to go. All right, so I get a little bit about the company that I just joined about a month ago, and this is Brent Ozar Unlimited. We do consulting as well as training. I thought I knew a lot about SQL Server before I joined the firm. I found out very quickly that I do not know as much as these guys do, these guys and gals. They are really, truly the best in the business, and we are here to not only help you learn more about SQL Server, but also help you to make your SQL servers run fast. So if you have any questions about that, reach out to me, and we could schedule something up for you. All right, so this is what we're going to talk about right now. We're going to talk about Entity Framework. And if it scares you that we're talking about Entity Framework, I would say that's probably an okay thing. I'm okay with you being scared a little bit about Entity Framework. Now, we're going to talk about the first half is going to be what is Entity Framework, how does it work, why do developers use it, all these questions that have probably been in the back of your mind, but you're just kind of too afraid to ask. But the most of this presentation, about 35 minutes or so, we're going to go off do some demos. Okay, we're going to go off and we're going to take a look at what should you, the DBA or the data professional, should be looking for in an Entity Framework project. So this is going to be a very demo heavy. Like I said, we'll be looking at code. I will be walking you through that. So it's going to be look very much like SQL. So I don't want you to be scarred. Don't be scarred. It's all good. It's okay. We're going to walk you through all of this stuff, and we're going to hopefully help you to make your applications that use Entity Framework just a little bit better. All right, everyone good with that? I see head nodding everywhere across the globe. It's amazing. All right, so let's go. First off, before we start about Entity Framework, we have to get started, talk about some of the underlying architectures of what Entity Framework is. And that is basically an ORM. And what is an ORM, you ask? An ORM stands for Object Relational Mapping. And an ORM very simply converts programmatic objects into a relational database, right? So for things like C# and .NET and C++, we have things called object-oriented programming. That is just the way that we program. And there are some newer methods called functional programming. There are some older stuff, called procedural. In this case, most of the time that we're going to be using object-oriented. Now, what an ORM does is it takes those objects and we map that to a database. And the ORM understands how to take the objects and save it to the database, and then take the data and put it into an object. So this is a way that for us as developers don't really have to think too much about our database. We just have to think in objects. We map everything together, the data is saved, and the data is hydrated back into an object. Entity Framework isn't the first person around or the first application to do this kind of stuff. Hibernate has been in Java for a very, very long time. Also, Active Record in Ruby is another type of ORM. If you're using a .NET technology, maybe you've heard of nhibernate. nhibernate is another older technology. It's been ported from Java, and that is also used in .NET a lot. I would say pretty lot. So again, think of ORM as a way that we could take objects and then store into database. So what is Entity Framework? Well, we just talked about ORMs, and we know it's an ORM for .NET applications. What it allows us developers to do, it allows us to generate databases. If this doesn't scare you, I say it should. I don't know about you, but generated databases kind of scares me a little bit, and we should be thinking about our databases and how it's structured, because that will in turn affect performance later on. It also allows us to save object data to a database. It allows us to generate DDL scripts from object changes. So if I change the structure of my classes or objects, it will generate DDL scripts to change the database. And yes, that should scare you too. It also allows us to generate SQL for data retrieval. This is probably what DBAs are probably the most concerned with, is the actual SQL. Is it creating optimal SQL for my database? The answer is probably not. But I think there's ways that we can kind of get around this. But here's the really key behind all this, is that all these great things, generating databases, saving object data, generating SQL, it's all done with very, very small amounts of code. Or before we actually had to write all this stuff, now Entity Framework does it for us auto-magically. So let's take a look at what us developers used to write back in the old .NET 2.0 days, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to walk you through this really quickly. So what we used to have to do is we have to have this SQL connection, and we have to go ahead and create that. That's this guy right here. Then we had to open the connection. Then we had to create a command for that connection, set the connection to the command. Then we had to put some sort of command in there, and that could be a select statement, an update, or kind of whatever we were trying to do at the time. Then if we're trying to get data back, I had to execute this reader. And then once I got this reader back, essentially is like a table of information, I had to do something with that. And most of the time, we had to load that back into an object. Now this is something that Scott Hanselman, who's a developer over at Microsoft, he called left-hand, right-hand code, right? It's just a bunch of plumbing code where I'd say, hey, the reader, loop through the reader and just say, hey, this equals this property in an object. And we just have to write all this plumbing code. Then we dispose the command, and then we close the connection. We used to have to write this all the time, right? And that's not very much fun to write. So there were some frameworks that helped us out with this, but overall, we were kind of writing the same code over and over and over. So what do we have to now write with Entity Framework? This. Stores context.stores, that will give me the entire store table. And I don't have to write any of that plumbing code. I don't have to write anything else. I don't know about you, but that looks a whole lot better than that, right? So this is why Entity Framework is pretty much popular, because it's so simple to go and get data just right outside the box. All right, so how do we as developers use Entity Framework? Well, there's two ways, and you really need to know both of them, because they kind of are different enough, and they will kind of have differences that will affect how we approach some of these problems that we're going to see in just a few minutes. So the first way is Designer. The Designer is also called EDMX, right? The EDMX is an older way of doing things. This is when we talk about Entity Framework 1.0. This is the original way we used to have to do it. We had to open this Designer, we have to create our mappings, and we have to draw lines, and we have to do all this stuff to get the Entity Framework to work. Well, a few years back they said, you know, this isn't the best way of doing things. There's a better way of doing it, and that is straight through code. I'm not expecting anybody here to read all this other stuff. It's really not necessary, but just to show you that we can now write code as opposed to drawing pictures and lines. So this is right now Microsoft's preferred way of doing mappings and setting up Entity Framework inside of their applications. And in fact, in the next version, what used to be called version 7, it's the only way we can do mappings. The Designer has been killed. The Designer is dead. So if someone asks you, if you ask someone, hey, what are you using? Code using the Designer? You now understand, you know, what the differences are between the two. All right, sip of water. Excellent. All right, so here's how Entity Framework works. And I'm not going to go very deep in this. It's going to be very, very simple. So what we have here is, let me turn the laser point off, is we have the code first, and we also have the Designer. So you're not going to have both inside your applications, but what you will do is when you start the application, the application will then take a look at the Entity Framework. It will say, are you in code first? All right, well, I'm going to take that. Or are you a designer? I'm going to take that. And then it creates all this metadata around it. And that is in this system.metadata.edm namespace. But it has all the mappings now. It understands about the code, and it understands about the database, and it understands how to hydrate data, and understands how to save data back to the database. So what it will do is it can now spit out a database if we needed to, right? Scary. It can also do query compilation, right? So it can now generate my queries and do all that other good stuff. And then it could also take my table-based results and then put it into entity-based results. So what does that mean? So when I call a query in SQL, I'm going to get a table-based results back. Well, I don't want to deal with that inside of my .NET application. I want to deal with it in objects. So it will then put that table-based results into your object-based results. So then now I'm dealing with objects, and I'm not dealing with tables. All right. So that in the very simply, what that is that is how Entity Framework works. So any questions about that, we'll go ahead and ask in the questions panel, and then we'll answer that at the end. Okay. This guy is very important to me, and I will tell you why. Because there's a lot of times that we as the data people talk about Entity Framework, and we get our namings all mixed up, right? So we call one thing, but yet the developers are hearing something else. So this is my slide on how we all get on the same page as far as calling an apple or an orange an orange. So let's start off at the new database level. So if we're design-centric means I'm using the model, right? The designer that is going to be going away in the next version of Entity Framework. So what we do is we have something called model first. And if we do model first, we're going to create the model, the Entity Framework model, in the designer. And then once we create the model in the designer, we're going to generate the database, and then I'm going to generate the classes from the designer, right? We call that model first. That makes sense. I create the model first, then I generate the database, then I generate the classes, okay? Well, we could go down, and we have something called database first. Yeah, then we create the database first, and then we reverse engineer the designer, and then I could auto-generate the classes from that. And I'd say you'd be exactly right. We design a database the way it needs to be designed, right, according to the business and the rules and everything else, and then we can just go ahead and reverse engineer a designer EDMX model, and then I could auto-generate my classes directly from that. All well and good. All that makes perfect sense until we get to the newer stuff, right, the code-centric. So code first, if we have a new database, means that I can define my classes and my mappings in code. Okay, so far so good. And then I could generate my database at runtime. Kind of scary, but people do it, and it seems to work in general for them. That's good for them, all right? But what if I have an existing database and I want to go ahead and use code to do all my classes and mapping? Well, you would think they call it something else, but they don't. They call it code first. So as opposed to having a different name for code first, which would mean I define my classes first, and then I'll generate my database, code first also means I could have an existing database fully designed using my favorite designer tools, or the Irwin or ER Studio or something other design tool, and I can still use the code first to define my classes and mapping in code. And in fact, I have some tooling that I will read the database and then auto-generate my code for me. So this is an important thing that we need to be able to understand that, hey, when we say code first from a developer perspective, that us as data people can understand that code first could mean I'm auto-generating a database or I'm using an existing database. Okay, so if you hear a developer say code first, ask the question, are you using Entity Framework to generate the database, or are you having an existing database, and then as we roll out versions, we are updating the database as it goes out. Okay, this is an important slide here so that when we talk to developers, we're actually saying the same things. Okay. All right, I'm not going to go too deep in all of the framework versions and all this stuff. I have this here just for your edification. I will bring out 2 points here. One, that is, this is crazy, Entity Framework version 3.5. Entity Framework version 3.5 used to be called version 1.0 till about a year-ish ago when Microsoft started calling it 3.5. We're not quite sure why, with the exception of they just wanted to line up that naming along with the .NET version that it went out with. The problem is that it was called 1.0 for a very long time, and then recently they just started changing the name of that. So if you ever hear .NET version 1.0 and then you hear version 3.5, they're the exact same thing. Microsoft has just retroactively changed the naming of all that. It's just the kind of way it surprised a lot of us in the community when they did that. The other thing I want to point out is the new version, version 7, which is not called version 7 anymore. It is called Entity Framework Core 1.0. All right, so Microsoft has been doing a big push around a new version of .NET, which is going to be multi-platform, and that's exactly what Entity Framework is focused on. It's focused on multi-platform, so it wants to run new devices other than Windows. So you think Linux, you think, which was a big thing for SQL Server now. We all had to figure out how Linux works now. Mac, possibly even phone devices. So that's what they're focusing on, but they're also not only focused on those, they want new data stores. Think NoSQL. So they want to have Entity Framework not only be multi-platform, but also attached to different data stores like NoSQL and things like that. That's what they're working on. Not quite sure if they'll get that in the version 1, but maybe in version 2 or version 3. A lot that's coming up for Entity Framework. The other thing about the new version, it's a ground-up rewrite. Okay, so there's nothing old that's in it. They just said, we've been working on this for 10 years, and now let's go ahead and change it all together. So that's what they've done. Not that it's a bad thing at all, but they had some new ideas, and they're now implementing those in Entity Framework Core version 1.0. All right. So why do developers use Entity Framework? Well, frankly, it's quite simple. One, it's in the box, it's there. They don't have to really think about it. It's the recommended way of doing things from Microsoft. The developer works with the objects that they know and love. They don't have to worry about SQL or CRUD commands or doing those things that we are typically not good at. We're typically not good at writing really performant SQL. It's actually developer productivity too, so I don't have to be jumping into my database or anything like that and understand another 800-page SQL book. I can then focus on just my business domain, my objects, not my database connection, commands, and all that other stuff that we used to have to get through. So mainly, that's why developers use Entity Framework. It's really for ease of use. But where does Microsoft stand in all of this? Wow. They are making minimal investments in ADO.NET. They have made changes. Mainly, I think those were from the async await stuff, right? The multi-threaded stuff. I think that's the last thing I saw that was changed in ADO.NET. The link to SQL, which was almost like Entity Framework version 1, that is dead. So please don't be using that anymore. Entity Framework is the recommended way to do data access in .NET applications. And if you didn't know, Entity Framework is now open source software. So that's really exciting for us developers, because if we ever come into a problem with Entity Framework, we can now grab the source code, do some debugging on it, and if we find a bug or we want a feature, we could just code that up, send a pull request, and then hopefully the Entity Framework team will pull that into the product. So it's very powerful, very cool for us to have that kind of control over the software, kind of masters of our own destiny now. And of course, we talked about Entity Framework being the next version being a complete rewrite. So that's where they're going with Entity Framework. If you say, hey, maybe there's a different way, Mr. Developer, to do our data access, this is kind of what we've got right now. And yes, there are other ways, but Entity Framework is really the recommended way to doing data access. So what can we do, right? What can we, the DBA or data professional, do about this Entity Framework thing? Well, first thing we could do is that we could identify our common problems that the Entity Framework applications have. The second thing, you may not like this, but we need to work together with the developers, because there's information that they have that you do not have, specifically on programming and an Entity Framework, and then there's information that you have that the developers don't have, specifically on how SQL Server works and how proper SQL should be written. So my task is for you is that you need to start educating your developers on how SQL Server works, because writing good performant SQL is pretty hard. And when you have Entity Framework doing it for you, we as developers don't necessarily know if it's good or not. I get data back. That's good enough for me, and that's how most of the developers take a look at this. Well, us as data professionals know a lot more about SQL Server and know that, hey, just getting rows back doesn't mean that's the best way for it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at common Entity Framework problems, and I am spot on time. That's amazing. We're going to take the next 40 minutes and we're going to take a look at some Entity Framework problems, and these are all demos. So we're going to go through code, we're going to go through SQL, we're going to hit all these things one after another. And we're going to do these one by one. So if there's something else you want and it's not here, I'm sorry. Maybe I could point you in a direction afterwards where you can get some information. But we're going to do this right now. So this is database generation. We're going to take a look at a database that has been generated by Entity Framework. And then I'll point out things that I'm looking for inside of a database. If you were sitting here with me, I'd be asking you the questions, but you're not. And unfortunately, we'll go through that database and I'll say, okay, these are the things that I look for when I look at a database that's generated from Entity Framework. The next thing we're going to look for is the N+1 problem. The N+1 problem is not an Entity Framework problem. It's an ORM problem. And we're going to show you how it happens and how you fix it. A murder on the index express, that's the next thing we're going to go over. I'll show you how Entity Framework can destroy indexes. And we'll show you how to fix it so that they don't kill all your indexes all over the place. Searching is a big problem that we have. And we'll show you how we can make things just a little better using a little older SQL Server technology. Implicit convergence, this has mainly been fixed. So the Entity Framework team has done a great job. And they've fixed this problem mostly, except with the new stuff. And from there, we can get ourselves in trouble. And then finally, I have a short demo on how query complexity is, and maybe some ways that we could get around some of this query complexity, because it is pretty hard to write SQL in a language called LINQ, which is a query language, which then gets translated to SQL. So it gets kind of messy because you have a language of LINQ, which is translated to SQL, and then SQL is translated into an execution plan. So we have all these layers now that are now on top of our SQL, and hopefully I'll point you in the right direction on how we could simplify some of those queries. So hopefully this sounds good for everyone. And I'm going to take a swig of water now. Let's take a deep breath because we're going to dive right in. All right, database generation. Like we said before, any framework can generate databases. If this doesn't scare you, it really should, because it doesn't really do an awesome job of it. So, and the reason why is because it's really not a database generation tool. It can do it. I'm not quite sure that you want to, because when we build object-oriented applications, it's not that we're building relational databases. And so it's not like a one-to-one type thing, even though Entity Framework will try to make that into a one-to-one thing. The other thing I want to mention is that Entity Framework migrations. That is a feature that can generate database updates and it could even roll forward updates and roll back. So this too should scare you just a little bit as a DBA, because if we roll something back, and unless your developers are pretty thorough and write some code, it can delete your data, and then you won't get it back unless you have a backup handy. So AF migrations, although very cool and very interesting how we can automatically update a database, if we decide to roll back, it will delete that data, and that data will be gone. Pretty okay in a development environment, not so okay in a production environment. So my advice is that I do not recommend blindly generating databases from any ORM, Entity Framework or otherwise. I say let's do the proper work that we as data professionals are told to do, which is design databases that are ready for performance and as according to what the business have. Because how we do our objects, like I said before, isn't necessarily how I should be doing my relational database design. I love to do this relational design, and I don't do it using Entity Framework. So let's get into this right now, and let's take a look at some database generation. So I have there we go. So I have here some codes. Please don't get scared. Don't be scarred. It's okay. It's okay. I'm going to walk you through this real quick. This is nothing to be scared about. This is some Entity Framework code. It looks a lot like regular .NET code, if you really want to know. And most of you probably said, no, I really don't want to know. But let me walk you through it, and then we will go into SQL Server, and then we will see how SQL Server took this code and then created a database from it. So first off, let's take a look here. I have a class called Post. That Post has a whole bunch of properties on it. I've got things like an ID, a title, a body, a score, creation date, and I've got all these types associated with that, like int and string and date time, a nullable integer, things like that. And then I also have something here called tags, and tags is a collection of tag. And what's a tag? Well, that's another class that's here. I have an ID and a name and another collection of posts, which point back to post. So if this is something we don't usually see a lot in SQL Server, where we have a many-to-many relationship, but that's exactly what posts and tags have. They have a many-many relationship. Perfectly okay in OO programming, object-oriented programming. The other thing that we have here is that I have here, and I expect anyone to take a look at this and understand this, because most of the Entity Framework folks have to look all this stuff up, me included. This is doing a mapping between the two, and that this has a many-to-many relationship. So I have a post class, I have a tag class, and I have a many-to-many relationship between the both. All right, so let's take a look and see what SQL Server has done to this. What did it do? I'm not going to go off and run. I've previously done the database generation. That's all boring. And again, like I said, if you were here, I'd be asking you questions. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? So the first thing that you should take a peek at is I have 3 tables, right? I had 2 classes, but I have, I'm sorry, I don't have 3 tables. I have 4 tables. I had 2 classes, but I now have 4 tables. This one table here is called __ migration history. Now this migration history has a whole bunch of metadata that's associated with Entity Framework. You don't want to really touch this thing. This is kind of internally type thing to Entity Framework. I would say kind of keep your hands off that, know that it's there, because the next time Entity Framework runs, it's going to take a look at that and say, hey, what changes do I need to make to this database? So it's there. Just keep keeping on. Understand that that is some Entity Framework under the hood goodness that's there. So here's our post table. Our post table has a whole bunch of other interesting stuff here. And we took a look at that. That was a post class. It is called posts now. The other thing I didn't pop out there is that, look at the Stack Overflow.GenDB. Maybe that is the name of our project, and you could see that kind of project over here. Maybe that is not what we want to call the database either. So we can actually name it inside of Entity Framework, but Stack Overflow.GenDB isn't really a great name. So that's probably something we're going to have to change. The other thing that's really interesting is that I had an ID here, but I didn't actually call it anything here other than ID. What Entity Framework does is that it goes off and creates a primary key if you call it an ID or the class name ID. So in this case, if I called it ID or post ID, it would then just call it, it will create a primary key on that, which is really cool, which is really smart. That's all good stuff. Now the other thing is what should get you really scared here, that I have nvarchar maxes on this title and body. And the reason I should be scared is because now I can't put an index on those guys. It's so sad. We want to make sure that we have the right sizing for our string fields inside of our databases. So here we can say in Entity Framework, hey, this has a length of 250 or 500 or whatever this should be. But because we didn't say that, I now have an nvarchar max. And now I have a problem if I ever decided to put an index on that guy. Same thing with body. Body may be valid. I need an nvarchar max. Maybe I needed a varchar here. And in this case, we could actually just say varchar inside of Entity Framework. But because string types in .NET don't have field lengths and that they're Unicode by default, it put nvarchar max, which is why you have here. You'll see this a lot if your developers haven't put the forethought on of, oh, well, maybe I should, put an attribute here and say this should be only 500 characters. So definitely take a look at that kind of stuff. The other thing here is that I have date time. If this is a greenfield database, I should be using datetime 2. That is the preferred method of data type for datetime these days. So there's a way we could also say datetime 2 inside any framework. We didn't because it's right outside the box, so we want to keep a track of that. Also want to take a look at the ints, make sure the ints don't need to be big ints. There's easy ways for us to do that inside any framework as well. So we have keys that are here, and as well indexes created off the key, which is all pretty valid. Let's go down to tags, and tags the same thing, and made an ID out of the ID column. Sorry, made a primary key out of the ID column. Did the same thing with name and nvarchar max. It's no bueno. It's not good. No really other surprises that are here. This is our surprising one right here, and where it's post tags. So I had two classes. I said I had a many relationships between both. In a relational world, I need to create a third table, and that's exactly what it did here. Is that it created a table, and not only that, but it put the proper foreign keys on it. So I've created a concatenated primary key of post ID and tag ID. I didn't define any of this at all. It did all this automatically for me, and it also created a foreign key back to the post table and a foreign key back to the tags table, which is all really nice. Now the other thing that it started doing in Entity Framework version 6, it started adding indexes for us. So this is really cool, very exciting, because before you could be a complete hero inside of an Entity Framework database, and if all you did was throw indexes on your foreign keys, you would get this huge performance boost because the developers aren't thinking about indexes, they're thinking about business functionality. Well, out of the box now in version 6, they will create, Entity Framework will create indexes on your foreign keys for you. Now we may need to tweak those. We may need to add some other columns inside of our index keys. We may need to add some includes, whatever we need to do, but at least it's a start that we can go off of. So that is kind of our trip around a generated database, and hopefully that kind of giving you some little clues of what you should be looking at when you see a generated database from Entity Framework. All right. So let's review the things we need to look for. And that's one, normalization, because this is coming out of an application, and usually normalization is done by a human being. We make sure we're at the right level of normalization that we expect. Relationships, not necessarily relationships that are there, but the relationships that should be there. Make sure that you have the right relationships in the right spots. A lot of times developers think relationships are just kind of superfluous. And as we all know, as data professionals, we really need them. The other thing we need to make sure that for proper types, so I already showed you that we need those proper types. I had nvarchar max. I probably need some sort of a length on those. And if I needed a big int, definitely there's an easy way for us in any framework or to do that, is that we just call it an int64 as opposed to a regular int. We need to make sure that indexes on foreign keys. In version 6, it does it for you automatically, but maybe they had an application that was done for version 6 and the indexes won't be there. Primary keys, you need to check those. Alternate keys, one of my big things is going in and taking a look to see if there's alternate keys on your identity columns. Why is that? Well, because now we get duplicate data, and you probably will. You say, oh, no, not my application. Yeah, if you have an identity on your primary key and you don't have alternate keys, you're pretty sure you're going to have duplicate data somewhere. I've been to many different clients, and we're like, oh, what's all this duplicate data doing here? And in fact, I had one client that spent 3 weeks going through putting alternate keys on all their tables because they didn't think it through, and it was kind of painful for them to go off and do that. You want to take a look at their table naming convention, singular versus plural. I'm not getting into that holy war. It's singular, but you make sure it's all consistent. And then object naming, so your keys and indexes, making sure that they're according to the patterns that you set off in your other systems. All right, so let's get to the next problem, and that's this guy, n+1 problem. And in fact, I was just on a webinar earlier today where someone had described this problem to me. So, and I said, hey, n+1 problem, it's what you probably have. So this problem is, like I said before, this is not just an any framework problem, this is an ORM problem. This happens when we have a one-to-many relationship where I have, in this case, I have a store, and then I have many customers associated with that. What happens is that I make a call to the store table, I will get rows back. Say I get 10 rows back. And as opposed to getting all the customers for that store in one call, or those stores in one call, I will then loop through all the rows that I get back. So I loop through 10 times, calling a database 10 times to get all the customers for that particular store. Any framework, it's very easy for us to do this. So as opposed to making one call, we have made 11, right? N is the number of rows, 1 is the original call, n+1. That's how that comes about. So let's take a look at the demo for the n+1 problem. All right, so just so you know, I will be using SQL Server Profiler. Do not make fun of me. I do know extended events are out there. This is not a production system, so I could use SQL Profiler on my development box as long as I want. So let's take a look at this n+1. I have this demo application. We will go into the Stack Overflow database. If you do not know, Stack Overflow is a Q&A site for technical type people. I'm sure you probably know that already. What you may not know is that they do make the data available every 4 months. So they come up with a new data dump, and then you could use a tool called SODDI, that's SODDI, and then you can actually download that into SQL Server if you like. I do know that somewhere on the Brent Ozar site, they have made a torrent available for a whole database. I think it's a backup, or maybe it's just an attachment, where you can just attach the new database, and then you'll actually have the Stack Overflow data. Now, this is a big set chunk of data, somewhere around 60 to 80 gigabytes. It's good demo data, right? This is no slouchy type stuff. So that is what we'll be using kind of for the rest of the demos here. Okay, so let's get into this. I'm only going to focus on this small piece right here. This is what we call a link statement, a language integrated query. This is how we would query inside of our entity framework. What this does is that this will translate into a database SQL call. So let's get into this real quick. I'm not going to, don't worry about understanding about this. This is going to be very straightforward. And in fact, this gets a lot easier as we go on. So in this case, I'm getting something from the post table where the post tags equals SQL bulk copy. All right, so I'm getting any post that has SQL bulk copy inside of them. And then I'm going to select it. When I'm done, I'm going to loop through each of those posts, and then I'm going to get, hey, any link post that you have there, go and get that. Well, the problem is that I don't have this link posts up inside my original call, up inside this guy right here. So Entity Framework says, oh, I don't have that data. Let me go get it right now. So every time I loop through this post, it's going to go off and get the link posts one at a time. And I'm just doing a simple count in the middle of all that. So we should get the accurate number of records that have come back from this link post. So let's go off and run that guy. We'll make sure that Profiler is running. Good. We can run that. And this is going to be a simple console application. We can just click. There we go. And I just hit number 1. And it should be doing some work in the back. And look at that. And it is running a whole bunch of SQL for us. Isn't that great? Should take about 15 seconds to run this whole thing, so let's just let it finish. And we're done. Well, it took 20 seconds, and we only got 98 rows back. So if we go to the initial call here, we get all of this gobbledygook. I'm not going to talk about all the select statement right now, but I want to show you that it does this crazy exist statement where SQL bulk copy. Okay, but as opposed to getting all of the data that we need, it's going through one at a time, getting all of the post links, and there's one call, and there's another, and there's another, and there's another, and another, and it went through 98 times, 98 calls to get all the data that we need until we finally got everything. Right? This isn't the most efficient way of doing this, people. So how do we fix this? Right? So this is a code thing, so we need to get with the database or the developers to fix this. Well, in this case, the fix is actually pretty simple. I'm not going to say it's the most optimal way of doing it, but this is a heck of a lot better than calling this 99 times. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the same exact SQL call or link call, and I'm going to use this include link post. So what that will do is it will tell Entity Framework, say, hey, include this link post data. So whatever you go get this data at the same time. So when I make this call here in my loop, the data is already there. So let's take a quick peek at that. I'm going to clear that. And now I'm going to run number 2, which is the fix for that. And that's a lot faster. So it went down from 20 seconds to about a half a second or so. Still not great, right? So I guess that's depending on your performance metrics. But for me, half a second, we could do better than that. But I'm only making one call. I've now knocked it down from 20 seconds to a half a second. And we now get all the data all back at once. And we could see I now have this, see this extent 2 alias? That is where, pardon me, that is where all our link post data is, and it's all in the same query. So now as opposed to making 99 calls, we're making 1, which is an awesome and excellent thing. So that's how we fix the N+1 problem. Okay. Like I said, let's wrap this demo up. So this is, we want to make sure we use the link includes. That's the quick and dirty way of fixing this. There are other ways of fixing this as well, but that is really the fastest way of doing it. The other ways we could fix this is by using a store procedure. Yeah, I said it. I said it. You could use a store procedure. Sometimes that is the best way to fix some of these problems. So I didn't demo that, but yes, it's there. So let's talk about the next guy, where Entity Framework decides to kill all your indexes. And by death, I mean kill them dead. So by default, a link query is going to return all of the attributes in an object. Right? So if I have a pretty large object of 20 attributes and that's going to one table and pulling all 20 columns, it's going to do that every time unless I tell it otherwise. So essentially, we're doing a select star against the table. And we all know, as data people know, select stars are really good for our database, right? No, select stars are kind of evil. So what happens? Something called a bookmark lookup, or in these new SQL days, called a key lookup. And how do we fix that? Well, we could use something called link projections. And let's take a peek on how that works. All right. If I could hit the right buttons, we could see how it works. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and clear this guy again, and we'll get down to this right here. So this piece of link syntax should be a lot more familiar. So I did you a little curveball by throwing that one up there, but I went ahead and decided to create something a little more simpler so that the rest of us can read. And in this case, we're doing a link statement. You see the select is at the bottom, and that may look a little weird for us data people, but if you think about it, it does make sense that the select is at the bottom. Because when I create a select a SQL statement, I'm worried about where my froms, where my table's coming from, and then in my joins, and then my constraints and my wheres, and then I'm getting all the data around that. So in fact, a lot of times when I write it, I just do select star, and then I'll go back and say, okay, well, what data am I looking for from the tables? So actually, this actually works a lot better when you write it in this manner. But I digress. So here we're going to do select from posts where tag equal JavaScript, and then I'm just going to put that into a simple list. And that's all we're going to do. And then we can see how this guy works. And it's all very simple. Hey, what we're getting is just all the JavaScript tags from the post table. That's it. And I can run number 3, and it thinks about it. Okay, so that took 5.5 seconds. I got 41,000 rows back. And if we take a look at the profiler, you see it took all the columns out there. So everything that was in the post table, it went ahead and grabbed. Not the most efficient way of doing it, especially since I'm not even pulling back any of the columns at all. If we take a look at our execution plan, yep, sure enough, look at that key lookup. That key lookup's there, and it's taking all the processing time. It wants to go back to that table and to grab all the data, as opposed to using this nice index that we've created called post tags. If we take a look at post tags here, it has the ID, the tags, and the title. So I believe tags and title are includes. And I'm sorry. The ID and title are includes of this index, where tags is the index key, right? So that's how it's getting its killed. It's going and calling all this data as opposed to going and grabbing it directly from the index. So what is our fix here? Where our fix here is we only grab the data that we really need. And in this case, we use something called a link projection, where I would say, hey, create a new object and only include the ID and the title. Well, the ID and the title are in the index as an include. Well, if we run this, it shouldn't go down to do a key lookup. It should just go straight from the index, pull the data straight from the index, and everyone should be good as gold. So if we run this guy here, and that is number 4, 93 milliseconds, right? So hey, I could run it again. See, yeah, look, 90 milliseconds. Hey, we're getting better. But the fix is very easy, very simple. Where if we only get the data that we need, now I'm not squashing on all my indexes, doing all these key lookups into the clustered index. Okay, so that is a pretty easy fix. If you see your indexes start getting clobbered and doing all these key lookups kind of everywhere. All right. Next one, searching. Well, we all know that like statements and like the like clause just kind of, yeah, it's not great for performance, right? And we have something in LINQ that creates the like clause in SQL. It's called contains. Well, we could use this to, or at least use full text searching, kind of an older SQL technology. Anybody still remember that? And I know it has its problems, but it's in the box and it's there, and it's fairly easy to set up. But we could use searching inside of Entity Framework using full text search to kind of help out, so we're not creating all these like clauses so that it really just bog down the server. So we could do a quick look into this, and we have here. So this is our statement that will go off and create a SQL-like clause. And we're just, hey, anything that has COBOL in the title, any post that has COBOL in the title, that's what we want, right? And somebody's saying, oh, God, no, COBOL, not again. Yes, I was a COBOL programmer at one time, but I ran very, very quickly away. I ran very fast away. But we're just going to get all the posts that contain COBOL, so it's just going to give me a like statement around that. And so I'm going to clear that. We're going to run this, and that is number 5. Nope, that's the wrong one, 5. There we go. Still thinking about it. Just in case you're wondering, this is an SSD box with 16 gigs, and it's an i7. This is my own personal machine. There's hardly anything else running on it. So there's not a lot going on here, and it still took almost 10 seconds for 484 rows back. And if I take a look at the query, sure enough, I'm pulling back all those columns again, and I've got this COBOL thingy going on, right? It's not the fastest thing in the world. So what can we do about it? Well, I've already set up full text search here on the SQL Server, and we can call a SQL statement using full text search directly in any framework. Maybe we could change this into a stored procedure if we really wanted to. In this case, I'm just demoing this out. Hey, we could do this. And I'm using something called, I believe, string replacement, right? So this little curly brace 0, .NET will automatically replace that and put COBOL in there, right? And you'll see that when we run this. But in this case, I'm just using full text search and using free text, and it's going to do a search, and it's going to be faster, 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 right? All right, so let's run that one, and that is number 6. Right? Still not the fastest thing, but that's a lot better than 10 seconds. So that's 1.7 seconds is almost 2 seconds long. And if we go off and, oh, look at that. That's that one. Yep, there we go. So we're selecting all of them from free text, and that has my parameters, and there's COBOL, right? Which is why I do the curly brace 00, so it creates my parameter inside the execute SQL. So not the best. Maybe if I filter down, so as opposed to doing select star, maybe if I just filter it down, you only got the columns I need, this would be a lot faster. But this the demo is supposed to show you that, hey, if I do a like, it's going to be slow, and if I do full text search, it's going to be faster. Okay, so there are other ways we could handle that, but they are outside of SQL Server. So you could use something like Elasticsearch or Solr or some other NoSQL type thing that kind of puts that processing onto another search technology, which is kind of designed for that. And I've seen a lot of people go off and do that with pretty good success.
Excuse me, Richie, it's almost 3 o'clock, and there are a lot of questions. Would you like to stop here and do questions and then come back another time and do the rest of your demos?
I don't have much. Actually, I only have, let's do this. Let me do one more. This is going to take like just a minute, and then we could go to questions. Does that work for you? All right. So implicit conversions, right? So in general, this is fixed. So in EF 4.1, the team did a good job and have really fixed this problem. But if you're running code first, you could still run into this issue. So for the last demo of the day, let's take a peek at implicit conversions. So here we have another very simple query where I'm just taking, hey, give me all of the SQL Server tags in the post and just give me the titles for that. That's all we're going to do, and that's all it's going to come back. So if I run that, number 7. Okay, so I got 1.4 seconds back. I got about 6,000 rows. But if I look at my profiler information, I get this special N here. Well, what's the problem about that? Well, I now have an index scan, and if I take a peek, I can't highlight it for you, but it is doing a convert implicit inside of the predicate. Okay, where it's saying, hey, I have an nvarchar, but it needs to be changed to a varchar because that is what's inside the database. And so it has to do this implicit conversion, and then it happens to scan, and it goes parallel, and everything kind of blows up, right? So what's the way we could fix this inside of Entity Framework? Well, for this, I have to stop the application, but we can very simply change our model to say, hey, don't look at this as an nvarchar as you would default. Look at this as a varchar. So in this case, I changed this to a varchar for this tags varchar property. Now, when we run this again, Entity Framework has the right information. It won't use it as a Unicode nvarchar. It will use this as a varchar, and that implicit conversion won't be there. All right. So that's a little better, and I'm sure if we run it again with a regular cache, it would be cool. And there you go. There's SQL Server, and my plan is much better. Where I'm just doing a straight index seek on that. My implicit conversion is gone, and everything is good. Right. The reason why it was a slower because Entity Framework had to do its kind of get up and go the first run type thing. So if I run it again, it'll be much faster. And yeah, see, 26 seconds. So that's why it was slow on the first go round. But that's implicit conversions, and those are really, really tricky to find. But once you find them, it's fairly easy to fix them inside of the code. All right, and that was our last demo. Questions? Hello?
I forgot to unmute myself.
It's okay.
Christian Sanabria wanted to know if you will talk about the repository pattern, and I think you'll have to deal with that on email.
Yeah. So the repository pattern is usually a good idea. I know that my good friend Julie Lerman has written a bunch about that. And if you use some of the scaffolding involved, I think like the Entity Framework Power Tools, you could actually get the repository pattern out of that. I haven't dealt with a lot of the greenfield Entity Framework development in a little bit, so I haven't used it a ton, but it's usually a good idea to use it.
Don Tuxworth asks, do you know of excellent books on Entity Framework for beginners?
Oh, for beginners. Okay. And in fact, I'll move you over here to where. Oh, I don't have the books here. I must have taken them out. But I point everyone to Julie Lerman's books and her videos on Pluralsight. If you're looking for something for beginners, I think her videos on Pluralsight are by far the best because they'll take you step by step on how Entity Framework works and how you can do simple things with it. Her books are very good as well, but they're a little more in depth, right, as 800-page books kind of go. So I kind of point people to her Pluralsight videos, and they are just wonderful. They are the best, and you could tell Julie I said that.
Okay, now here's a long question, and it's got two parts. Well, I have to find the second part. While tracing a single action in our application, the database reflects 10 T-SQL lines, exec sys.sp procedure params 100 managed type calls. And then it issues only another line with an execute sp1 T-SQL statement. It appears that the entity framework is a vehicle where the application is searching for the parameter set for several stored procedures. And he's wondering where he should start asking the programming team to look at how we can cut down the number of 100 managed calls. It's a long question. Where can I learn more about this? Are there any books you can recommend?
So I think I've kind of missed the question, like it being kind of verbose. Typically, I would punt on that. It sounds like it's doing an SP prepared statement, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you want to go ahead and email me at richie@brentozar.com.
Richie, I'll send you the whole questions list.
That's good.
And it'll have emails, and you can respond.
Yeah, I don't know how much time I'll have to respond to everybody. So if you email me personally at richie@brentozar.com, I will reply back. But I run a user group. I run a podcast. I have a full-time job. I have 2 small children, so answering everyone's questions would be kind of rough for me.
the several questions. You're going to send me the PowerPoint and the demos, right?
Yes, yes, yes. So if there's any other quick ones, I'd be more than happy to answer those.
I think that's about all we have time for. I will, as I said, I will send you the questions log, and you can do uh, as much as you can with it. Um, Here's one that's kind of interesting and might be a quick answer. Uh, some developers moving to Entity Framework are insisting that we change the existing database columns to eliminate nulls. I don't really see why this is necessary. What advice would you give them?
Nulls have a purpose, and I know that in our small SQL family community, we have many arguments on nulls versus not nulls and what purpose they have. But they do serve a purpose. They say that something is unknown, right? So null will never equal null, right? We understand that because unknown can never equal unknown because it's an unknown value. They do serve a purpose. I would. It is harder. I will say that it is harder to do. Write code with nulls in mind, okay? But it is better to write code with nulls in mind than without, because all of a sudden now we have specialized values that are now floating around. Oh, 0 doesn't really mean 0. 0 means we're missing something. Or -1 equals something else. And now
Okay,
we
I'm gonna.
have.
You can. Yeah, we've really run out of time, and there's somebody at my
All
door.
right.
Thank you. You can talk a little more. I'll come up and close the meeting.
All right, now I'm good. We're good. So finish up the nulls. I would say implement the nulls. Go and do the work. It will be better from your database because now you need knowledge about the data in order to do the work of the application, as opposed of the application having that knowledge. And that usually, as people kind of roll off the application, you start saying, oh, I have a value of 1. Oh, but 1 doesn't really mean 1. 1 means this, and that's not in the data. That's actually a knowledge in people's heads about the data. Typically a bad idea. So um, that would be my answer, is do the nulls because they actually mean something. They mean that something's missing. It's unknown. All right, so that's what I have. Feel free to email me at richie@brentozar.com. Also, I have my website, my blog is at joris.net. When I do get something and I blog about it, don't do it very regularly, but when I do, it's usually pretty good. So my podcast, awayfromthekeyboard.com. If you're in Miami and want to go to a phenomenal.net user group, that's my group, .netmiami.com. And my boss, brentozar.com. We have stuff every day that are coming on the blog, and that's how I got to know Brent and the team, and that's how I got this job, is through the blog. So I would say go off and do that. You can contact me on Twitter at Joris, and that's all I've got time for. Thank you, everyone, very much for joining me, and we'll catch you on the flip side.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.